Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. On the panel with me today is Mr. Robert Krause and Ms. Linda Schultz. Our assessor today is Ms. Pradeep Pawar. Our administrative person is Ms. Twinkle Sharma. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 to 7 on our docket today. Ms. Sharma, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony.
For sure. Ms. Assessor, please state your full name.
Pradeep Kaur.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Rod Slaughter.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, our first item on the docket today is item number 1, vacant land, commercial land on 187 Gary Street. Ms. Pawar, you may begin your presentation.
File number 242020. Roll number is 12093150100. The address is 187 Gary Street. The owner is Gary 187 Enterprises Limited. 2025 assessed value of this property based on the reference date of April 1st, 2023 is 2,160,000. The parcel uses a vacant commercial with the land area of 23,015 square feet. The zoning of this property is M, which is a multiple use. So on the page number 2, we can see the subject property has the recent sale, which is like a dollar sale. So it is not included for analysis. So therefore, we don't talk about it. So on the page number 3, the pictures of the subject property shows that the subject property is facing the front on the Gary Street. And the page number 4 has also the Google picture. On the page number 5, we can see that this property is valuated on the land value with 93.85 per square feet. And the page number 5, I also have 12 comparable for the land, which are the different range from minimum 83.10 sale price per square foot, and the maximum is 151.32 per square feet, with the mean of 115.88 and the median is 120.22. So if I'm choosing the best comparable out of this 12 list is close to the subject properties comparable number 4, based on the same zoning, and the sale price is nearly the same about the subject property. And it is a recent sale of 3rd August 2021. And from the pictures I will refer later on, shows that the comparable number 4 has the in-park parking lot. So from the page number 6 up to the page number, you can see 22, I have the pictures of all 12 comparables for the reference. So that is the end of my presentation. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Thank you. I do, Mr. Chairman. We do have some rebuttal evidence as well, so perhaps I would present that. Is it after my presentation or after the questions?
After your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pilar, for your evidence. The first question I wanted to ask, would you agree that by appraisal theory, two of the primary principles that we have to consider in land valuation are anticipation and supply and demand?
Yes, I do understand.
Okay. And so you would agree that the majority of your comparisons on page 5 are properties, for the most part, that have been purchased for development, where the development is certain and in short term?
Yes, mostly of them are the, I can say the parking, which are owned by Indigo or in park. And mostly are, I think, mostly for this property, the comparables are in park or Indigo, all are related to the, parking for the income related to the parking, I can say.
And you would agree that the subject property was the subject of a fire about a year ago, whereby the improvement that occupied about a third of the site burnt down, and that area has not been allowed for anything at this point, parking or development. Is completely fenced off. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct. We had the inspection too, and we find out that due to the fire, the Windsor Hotel was there before, which got torn up. And I do understand the couple of the spot wherever the Windsor Hotel was there is still empty, but the rest of area, if you can see from the picture on the page number 3, people are still parking the cars as per the Google view or our eye view.
Yes, but they're not parking on the fenced area. Is that correct?
Yep, I understand.
Okay, that's not contrary to what I saw a couple of days ago. As it stands, there are 44 stalls on the subject site, is there not?
Sorry, can you repeat your question again?
There are 44 stalls on the subject parking lot?
I have not counted it because in our database, there is no any record of outdoor parking. So I can't really comment on that because I personally did not count it.
And you'd agree that the comparisons that you have, which at the time were parking lots, such as you mentioned Index 4, which is at 330 Donald, you'd agree that those are completely utilized as parking. Then that site approximately has 75 parking stalls. Like every inch of that parking lot is income producing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware of any development plans in place for the subject site?
So right now, as per our database, there is no any recent building plan has been submitted. So I can't really know that when they are thinking to build something over there. So
But nothing is
nothing recently outstanding there to build something.
So to be clear, there is nothing in place for a development plan for the subject property at this
Yes.
at the reference date.
Yes, I'm aware of
Okay.
it.
So would you agree then that the highest and best use of the property at this point is parking?
I would say yes, because there is enough space for parking the cars, even though the hotel area is fenced right now, but still people can use this space in future for the parking because it's in the good location on the Gary Street, and I would say yes, it can use for the parking.
be clear, they would have to have permission from the city in order to officially and legally use that fenced
Yes,
off site as parking, correct?
yes, for sure. In future, we
Which
can
they do
take-
not have at this point, correct?
Yeah, currently, no.
No, okay. And so back to the question, if the highest and best use of this site, which I agree with, is income producing, why did the city not do an income approach?
Because right now this property is evaluated on the land. That is the best we can say. Because if we are using income producing, we don't have any data available to analyze. Because for income producing, we need income and expense information from the property owner, right? So if we don't, and the best use right now we can say is a vacant commercial, and that's why it is evaluated on the land only.
And sorry, the city does not have any income
No.
information or market information for parking downtown?
We have the information for the parking, but if we are talking about how the subject property is evaluated, it's on the land only. The reason why, because right now we don't have any income and expense information like what's going on there. So it's the best to evaluate the properties only on the land right now.
Is
If
the
in
city's
future-
approach not to use a mass appraisal model for the valuation of an income producing property?
We use mass appraisal model for income producing property, but every property is different, right? So this property is best evaluated on the land only, I can say.
That's all my questions. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you,
You're
Mr. Chairman.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Price, do you have any questions for the assessor?
No, I'm good right now. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
So are all the comparables on page 5 then also surface parking lots?
Yes,
All of them? Yep.
I can say yes, but let me double check it because I have marked down the information. Yes, I do agree. They all are the parking lots. Yes,
Okay, and you said that you could not do it based on the income approach, the subject property, because you did not have data
and also.
for that
approaches-
property, right?
Yes, true, and also the income approach does not justify our assessed value. So if I go on to the income approach, so that's why the best approach to use this property for the land value only.
But you had the question from Mr. Slaughter about using mass appraisal. So why couldn't you have used mass appraisal and use the income approach?
So in the mass appraisal, we can use the best approach is suitable for the properties. So we can either use direct comparison cost or the income out of three, any of them. So this property is based on the provided data and the sales comparable. We choose best is the land value only. To support our
Even
assessment.
though it's used as income?
No, not income.
Okay, how do you mean best though? Why is it best? Why
Because-
is land value the best?
Because in the income approach, we need all the expense information from the property owner to find out the net operating income. If that data is not available, so our income producing value does not justify the market value. So that's why this property is evaluated on the land only. So we don't have any
Okay,
income.
but I'll just have to say that I think I've seen a lot of properties where you have not provided actual income and expense information. I'm talking about, the properties in general all over town, and you have still done use the income approach. So what's your comment on that?
So For example, whenever I'm getting ready for the briefs, I try to load both approaches, right? The cost, the land value and the income too. But if I'm loading the income, it's not justifying our assessed value. So it's not matching with our current assessed value. So it's better for us to use only the land value for this brief. That's what I choose. And if I'm loading up the income and expense information, it's not available, the most recent income and expense information. So that's why it's not attaching into the briefs.
Well, if I may rephrase what you're saying, that if one approach is closer to what it's assessed, that
Yes.
makes it the best way to approach the value.
Yeah, that's how we learn to justify the value. So which approach is best for related to the assessed value, that's what we use.
Okay, so just to clarify, by best you mean closer to what it's assessed. You're going to use both methods, and then you're going to choose the one that's closest to the one that you originally closest to the value of the property that you're evaluating.
Yeah, I do understand. I can add up the income approach into the briefs as well, but there is no point if I'm not using this for this appeal. So that's why I excluded that data from the appeals. Otherwise, I can add it up to show that why the income approach is not justifying our assessed value. But in future, if board want to see the both approaches in the briefs, I would definitely put it in.
No, I just want to know why you chose to do it the land way. I don't want to see both of them. No, I just want to know why you chose it.
Yeah, because that, yeah, that's what I explained already, because the land approach is justifying our assessed value compared to the income producing. That's why we choose the land approach.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. Well, Mr. Potter, you need to give your presentation.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, was that?
Yeah, you may begin your presentation.
Oh, thank you. Something cut there for a second. Thanks very much. I have a direct evidence and then a rebuttal evidence. So I'll start with the direct evidence for 187 Gary. And for the sake of brevity, I won't go into too much detail that the assessor has not already provided. And thank you very much again for that. So on page 6 and 7, we have an overview of where the site is located in downtown Winnipeg, and then a photograph of the site that I took actually just about a week ago. So one of the fundamental concerns that we have when we value land is that we need to be careful not to overestimate development potential and be looking at the sales of lands where development potential is great and certain. That will indicate a very different value than a property where development potential isn't quite as certain or great. And what will determine those factors are both anticipation and supply and demand, are two of the primary factors. Let me go a bit more in detail into those factors. Downtown land, not every site has the potential or the demand to be developed in a short time frame. And as the amount of density that one can attain on a site grows, the value would grow, but also as the timeline for the certainty of development shrinks, the value will grow. So if you see where the subject property is located, it's outside of what they call the shed, which is the area immediately surrounding the Canada Life Centre. And parking lots in that area are typically higher demand because of the activities that we have in the shed district. That's not to say there isn't high demand for parking lots outside of the shed, but typically we'll find higher demand in higher density areas, for example, near Portage and Main, or in areas of downtown where there are higher density developments with more people that need more parking. The subject property is in kind of an odd location in the downtown on Gary, just south of St. Mary, where there isn't a lot of high density surrounding it, office or residential. So it is not a high demand income site. And furthermore, as far as I can tell, supply demand in the downtown is not favorable for development at this time. In fact, we're seeing a pullback in the demand for office. So that, of course, has a rippling effect, which affects parking. As demand for office is down, demand for parking is down. And multi-residential, while there is a push now to try and develop, but not much action. Any projects that we have seen downtown on the multi-res side at the reference date were actually stalled. We also need to be careful about the legislative requirement of staying within the bounds of the reference date. And so anything we hear about downtown development because of the federal accelerator fund, that happened in 2024. And let's just remember that as we talk today, our reference date is basically almost 2 years ago. So at that time, there is no evidence of a high amount of demand, and certainly there is a high supply. As we know, there's a lot of parking lots in downtown Winnipeg. There's no plans in place to develop this site. And frankly, I don't see any demand for development of the site in the near future. And until there is, I would suggest that we be cautious about valuing the property based on the sales of properties which may have been purchased for development. Therefore, the direct comparison approach, in my opinion, is not the primary approach for the subject property. Now, if we look at the income potential of the property, I think that's a better way to go, but we need to recognize one factor. I mentioned at the beginning that about a third of the site had been improved by a building called the Windsor Hotel, and it unfortunately had fire in 2023, late 23, and it was demolished. And since that time, and now we're talking about the physical site as it exists today, that's the important part of the legislation as well, the actual site in its physical condition today, it is still fenced. And I was there a week ago and I saw, you can see in the picture at the bottom, page 7, it's fenced off. Nobody parks there. If anybody did get their car in there, I don't know how and I don't know why. But legally, they are not allowed to, and they're still trying to get permission for any sort of use. Until that permission is granted, the physical condition of that site is 1/3 unused for parking. It would still have to be improved, by the way, as well. So we need to consider that when we look at the income approach, we have to look at the capability of producing income on the site right now, which is 44 stalls. Now, if we look at sale prices of other parking lots, one of the problems with the direct sales approach is it's rather blunt. It doesn't take into account, well, what is the income potential of those sites? A site with twice the income potential for its area will, of course, command a higher value. So what we need to do in an income approach, and this is the whole point of the nuance of an income approach, is take a look at the income potential of the subject property itself. And you need not have actual data. You can look to the market. That's how the mass appraisal model works. And then you apply an appropriate capitalization rate. Now, I'll talk about this in the rebuttal, but it's the city's sales comparisons are coincidentally very, very similar to the sales that we disclose in our capitalization rate study. But what it does not show in the city's evidence is the cap rates for those properties that did continue as parking lots and the commentary on the properties that weren't purchased for income potential, they were purchased for development. So I don't think we're getting quite a clear picture. So what we've done on page, I'll skip ahead here, page 10, is we did start with a direct sales comparison approach, but we're careful not to influenced by sales of superior properties. And when I say that, I mean properties that were purchased with clear intent and clearance for density development. And so the 6 properties that we look at are more what I call kind of mid-range. Potential development is there, but not necessarily immediately or not to the density that some of the other sales comparisons had in the city's evidence. So comparisons number 1 and 2, and again, this is on page 10, and I have aerial photographs of each of the properties in the appendix for the board's reference. The first 2 comparisons are from the city's evidence as well. We share these 2. They're downtown parking lots in the Exchange District. They're about half the size of the subject property. Another factor we must consider in a direct sales comparison approach is economies of scale. That being smaller lots typically will command a higher value. That doesn't always apply, but it is a general rule. Of course, you can have a site that's so small that there is no potential, and then, of course, the value is very minimal. So these are about half the size and they sold in 2019 for around $95 a square foot each. And they're right in the middle of the highly dense exchange district. In fact, they service predominantly 433 Main, an office tower converted to multi-res. Another point to highlight is that downtown Winnipeg was in a bit of a renaissance through the 2010s. It was an exciting time, a lot of development and a lot of interest. And again, as you have more interest in the overall downtown, whether it be for commercial or office or even multi-residential use, that has a ripple effect over into parking. So the more excitement at the time, the higher value likely for the parking. And these are in 2019, which is pre-pandemic, pre-hybrid work culture, pre-interest rates rising, which they did in starting in 22, and pre-supply demand imbalance, all of the factors which negatively influence development in downtown Winnipeg. So in other words, these were bought at a very optimistic time at $95 a foot. Then we have another site bought just outside of the downtown at 634 Portage. This was bought for development potential, but the timeline is rather far. It's still not developed, but they have plans to. So again, as the timeline shortens in that certainty, the value goes up. And this property, I think, is more akin to the development potential like the subject property, and it sold for $76 a square foot. 255 Bell is outside of downtown, but in a very attractive area in Osborne Village. Purchased clearly for development, and it sold for $77 a square foot. 320 River is a similar circumstance, purchased for development, $80 a square foot. And Zero Donald is the best comparison. Zero Donald is located just south of the subject property, south of Broadway, close to 55 Donald. And just north of that, actually. It was a parking lot that served 280, it served the CRA building on Broadway. And it actually sold with the CRA building on Broadway in late 22, very close to the reference date. But it sold separately, and it sold based on its income potential. And when we analyze that income potential, which I'll talk about in our capitalization rate study, it indicates a 5.5% cap rate. Now we start to see the clear inputs that we need to look at if we're doing an income approach for this site. So if we do just look at the sales, we have a value indication of around $84. But pause. Again, I mentioned to you at the beginning, 1/3 of this site is in limbo. Can't be used for parking. It can't be used for development until further notice. If I'm buying that parking lot, and again, I might know that down the road, likely I'm going to get some use for it, but I don't have it immediately. The time, I mention again, if the time stretches, the value goes down. We have to recognize the physical reality of the site as it exists today. So therefore, we apply a downward adjustment to the fact that 1/3 of the site can't be parking, it can't be developed right now. And we come to $75 a square foot. That is much more a reasonable per square foot value than the sale prices for properties that are going to be developed downtown, A, or B, have 100% and high demand income potential. So using $75 a square foot with this hypothetical, we can probably develop this one-day approach to value. We indicate a value of $1,733,000. We then turn on page 11 to our income approach to value. Now, as the assessor mentioned, we don't have actual information for the parking income because we typically obtain it from what the city or from what the owner provides to the city, but the city hasn't asked the owner for that information. So that's fine. As alluded to earlier, there's nothing stopping anyone from doing an income approach based on market information. And the city of Winnipeg produces their parameters that the mass appraisal model uses in valuing parking. And sorry, I don't have the appendix numbered, Mr. Chairman, but if we turn to the second last page, I believe, fourth last page in evidence, you'll see an excerpt from the city parameters mass appraisal model for the 2025 assessment. And it talks about rates applied to parking. I'll give you a moment to turn to that if the panel all has that page.
What is the PDF number, page number?
it would be page number 12 of the PDF it is sourced from, and it's, I think, the third or fourth last page of my evidence.
It's page 23 out of 25.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so you see at the bottom, it says calibration of the submodels, and we have the rates which the model uses, which are populated by all the income information that the city of Winnipeg has. And we would go to the very the very top line, which is parking lots in the inner downtown. There's a map on the subsequent page that shows that the subject property would be in this location. And it shows that on a net basis, the parking lot per stall is typically applied between $56 and $104 a square foot. And again, that's net. So what they're saying is that approximately a 50% expense ratio, a downtown parking lot might command $200 on the gross. And so we come down to a net, which is applied for the income approach, and that would be 104. So the subject property it's not a prime location by any means. As I mentioned, there are locations which would be higher demand based on density surrounding or entertainment surrounding. But it is in the middle of downtown. So I still have applied a rate at the high end. I used 101 a square foot, which is nearly the top end of the mass appraisal's net rates for downtown parking. There are 44 stalls on the site in use. So if we apply 101 per stall times 44 times 12 months, we would have a net operating income for the subject property of $53,328 per annum. And again, this is back on page 11. I'll just pause there. I trust that math is understood. So a pretty simple calculation at the high end of potential for the site from an income approach. Then the question is, what is the appropriate capitalization rate? Well, the assessor is correct. It's hard to find downtown capitalization rates, but we have a whole study where we did go through them, and I'll go into that in rebuttal because all of the sales, which the city has in evidence, that are only looking at the sale part aren't looking at the income part and the cap rates. But I think the best of all is the one I mentioned earlier for the site at 0 Donald. I think the actual civic address would be approximately 64 Donald. Very similar site in my mind to the subject property, except it has full income potential, not 2/3. And the capitalization rate that we determine on that site was 5.5%, and that evidence is in my rebuttal. And this kind of makes sense because last cycle we were typically arguing around 5.25% for downtown parking. And the main thing that's happened between the last reference date and this reference date that would influence capitalization rates for parking is interest rates have gone up. The Bank of Canada rate went up 400 basis points, which translated into an increase in lending rates, which translated into an increase in capitalization rates for office. And one would therefore correctly surmise that the capitalization rates for parking lots would likely increase slightly too, because it's costing more to borrow to acquire the site. So 5.5% makes sense to me based on our past studies and is corroborated by what we see for a very similar property sale right near the reference date. So if we apply 5.5% to the income I determined, we would have a value of $969,600, but we're now not counting that there is some land sitting there that doesn't have potential right now, but one day it will. So we need to add now, Mr. Chairman, a value for that excess land. And again, I think I'm estimating on the high side when I use $75 a square foot. I explained earlier why I'm using that, but that hasn't really counted for that time of uncertainty. Still, in an optimistic approach, I add $75 a foot for the 8,800 square feet of fenced off land. I've now captured an income potential for the site as it exists and a future potential for the excess land. That would bring me to a value of $1,630,000. It's fairly close to the direct sales comparison approach value. And that typically, for me, means I think I'm on the right track. But then I have to reconcile which approach is more appropriate. And for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning, I hesitate to use a direct sales approach when I don't see the development potential for the subject property in the same time frame that I do for the comparison sales that have been examined. In this time frame, at this moment, the highest and best use for this site until things change between city council and planning and the owner, the highest and best use is as a parking lot. So therefore, the income approach is the most applicable approach, and I ask the panel to consider the value of $1,630,000. And I think that completes our presentation, Mr. Chairman. In the appendix, again, is excerpts from the model and photographs of the aerial photographs of the comparison properties.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Pawar, you have any questions on the applicant's presentation?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Kraus, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a couple. When was the fire that brought down the Windsor Hotel? What year was that?
Late 23.
2023.
I think it was November. It's 23.
And I know you had said that you've given Zero Donald as sort of one of your key properties. What your issues with 330 Donald that the assessor had provided as sort of her number one, you were not like it looks similar in terms of it's still a income generating parking lot. It wasn't sold with investment or a development in mind.
Yes.
You have issues though with that comparison?
Yes,
Or
I do.
Or are you just saying that Zero Donald is a better comparison than 330 Donald?
Definitely, I think 64 Donald or Zero Donald is a better comparison as far as its location and surrounding density. But there are two concerns, and thank you for the question. Two concerns about 330 Donald. Number one, it is located very close or right in basically the shed. This is a parking lot that is used for guests or customers of the entertainment at the arena. So you're going to have a higher demand in that location, and it's a site that is completely, every spot of that site is a pretty dense site for parking. So it is a very highly dense site. So it's not that I have a problem with the site. It's just that if we're going to look at how that site compares to the subject, we should be looking on an income approach, not the sale approach, because the sale price is influenced by the amount of income it can generate, which is twice as much as the subject. So the best thing to do is actually what we did do in our capitalization rate studies earlier, is look at the income potential for the site and determine what the capitalization rate is. And now you have the proper denominator to say, okay, well, if that site has twice the income and we take our income estimated and apply that cap rate, we now have a better apples to apples approach. So it's not that I have a problem with the site, it's I have a problem with how people view that site or how they use it for the valuation of another property.
Yeah. And is there a timeline or is there a reason why the area is still fenced off? Like, is it a remediation issue for the hotel? And is there sort of a timeline for getting it back online for parking?
I'm not sure. I asked the owner back in November when I started evidence for this because I noticed that it was still fenced. And I said, what are the plans? He said, no plans. I said, can you use it for parking? He said, not until there's permission. I said, when is the next meeting about getting any permission for the site at all? And he said, early 2025. So we still have no word.
But it essentially is ready to be used as parking spaces.
Well, no, they'd have to properly pave it. They have to have permission.
Oh, it hasn't. Oh, so no worries. It's essentially just the rubble been cleared away and then that's it.
As far as I know, anyway, yeah, because it's
Okay.
completely fenced, but they certainly can't use it until they have permission.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, in general terms, for these surface parking properties in the downtown area, even if the income potential is pretty good with the cap rates, it's still like they could all be potentially developed, right? Would that be true?
Potentially, but this is the concern,
In
Mr.
general.
Chairman. I think, yeah, I mean, in a way, what I like to typically say is there's a difference between the highest and best use and a hypothetical and best use. Any site has potential for development, but the question that an investor has is how much density can I attain, and what is the time frame to attain that density? And I'd suggest that this.
I guess my point is, I think you mentioned a few times in your presentation about why properties were purchased. One, purchased for development, or was it purchased for the income?
Right.
Is that the correct characterization that you did that?
Yes, that's correct. And I'll go into that more in the rebuttal because we can look at each of those
I just want to
sales.
know how you know. How would you know why it was purchased?
Well, typically
For what
when we
reason?
investigate where the property was in discussions with council or planning. So we investigate the decision-making information system from the city of Winnipeg, and we see if there's been applications, for example, for a variance or a change in zoning or a development plan. And of course, we have the benefit of hindsight because when we turn around and look at a site and there's a building on it now, well, the likelihood is that the purchaser knew that there was basically a green light to development because that time frame was so short. So we try and look at those factors.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions. So you may begin your rebuttal. Do we have that evidence,
Yes, I've shared the rebuttal on your SharePoint. You can refresh. And
Ms.
it's
Sharma?
there.
Yeah.
Here's the rebuttal here.
Everyone has that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So on this rebuttal will apply to various properties today, but the very first page pertains to 187 Gary. The city of Winnipeg has presented a chart of sales, and the chart that you see on page 2 is the chart that we use often in our downtown parking studies. And it highlights some of the sales. So I think what's happened here is that the city may have been using our evidence, but the unfortunate thing is that there's 2 columns missing. The second last column is the cap rate, where we're able to determine a cap rate on the income in place. And the last column is the comments about what was happening at the time of sale and the likely intent of the purchaser. So the very first comparison is 126 King. It's a very small parking lot in the middle of the exchange, just near the King's Head Tavern. And it was surplus land to the city. And they sold it off as a parking lot in August of 2020. And in the evidence, Mr. Chairman, on page, and I'll just refer to this, and you can go and review this after, but we have the administrative report. I mentioned, you asked me, how do we know what's happening with that site at the time of sale? Well, this is one of the exercises we do is for any sale, if it's not a property we already represent, and therefore we know, we'll investigate as much as we can of the public records as to what processes or plans are in place for the development of the property. And this property was actually determined to be surplus land sold by the city. And in that report, they mention that the income in the year prior to the sale was approximately $43,000. So we're able to then take that income and apply an approximate expense ratio and determine what the approximate net operating income was of the site. And once we do that, we're able to then determine what the capitalization rate on the site was. And this is the important thing. Again, if you have a property that's sold, don't just look at the per square foot value, because then you're not looking at all the nuances of the site, economies of scale, income potential, et cetera, et cetera. Really what you want to look at is the cap rate and then apply that to your income or hypothetical income. And so you'll see in the evidence that the missing column indicated that our calculations are the cap rate was north of 6.5% for this site. So somebody had a great income stream, but a little bit of hesitation about where the future of this site might go for whatever reason. And it was also a city sale. So, I mean, we have to question it for that reason. So that for your reference, that's the background on that sale. And so to just say, hey, we have a parking lot that sold at $151 a square foot without knowing that information, I think could be misleading. So similarly, number 2, Pioneer Avenue. This is a property we represent. It was purchased by Artis REIT, a client of ours. Artis REIT also owned at the time 333 Main and 191 Pioneer. And these are the 2 buildings just off Portage and Main that you'll probably know as the MTS buildings. And they had, at the time, both buildings almost completely occupied by MTS employees requiring parking. And most of them were parking on this site. So it was a strategic move and basically an assemblage to purchase that lot for the high demand of the adjacent office towers. And subsequently, I can't speak any more to this because it was post-reference, but at the time of the reference date, I believe they were starting to plan to sell the entire parcel, 2 office towers in the parking lot. So various reasons why that it is a parking lot, yes. But now let's understand the circumstances here. It's a high demand Portage and Main parking lot with a captured tenancy that was basically purchased as an assemblage. Again, a big caution for an appraiser when you're looking at sales. So to say, well, we have a parking lot that sold for $136 a square foot without the background can be misleading. Third property, 175 Donald. This was purchased as a land assembly for the development of a high-density commercial development. That was the plan right from the start. So high caution at that. It's also only 3,000 square feet. Number 4, 330 Donald. Again, I would typically say this is a good comparison, but do not be misled by a sale price driven by the income potential, which is far greater. This is a property very close proximity to the Canada Life Centre. It's a high demand site. When I examine the aerial map, I'm surprised by how many spots they can actually get on this site. That's all fine and well. What we should be doing is determining the capitalization rate from that transaction and then applying it to our subject property's estimated income. And the capitalization rate that we derive by examining the income and expense questionnaires is 5.38%. That is very close again to the cap rate that I had in evidence of 5.5%. But overall, I'd suggest this is a superior property because of the location. The next comparison is 240 St. Mary. We don't have any information on this. It's beside the Mitzi's Chicken Fingers restaurant. It seems to be just used as parking. It is only 3,000 square feet, though, so let's be very cautious about comparing that to a 23,000 square foot lot. And then we have 124 Bannatyne. It's located in the Exchange District, close to our client's properties at 65 Rory and 112 Market. It's a high-demand site for parking. And again, the exercise then, if it's bought for parking, is don't be confused by the sale price per foot because that's influenced by the income. Look at the capitalization rate. And we did that exercise again, 6.04%. 641 William and 630 McDermott, we don't have information on. Those are close to the Health Sciences Center. And then we get into the properties that we did use at 170 and 127 Bannatyne. And then we have a whole list of properties at lower per square foot rates, which didn't make it into the city's evidence. And I'm not going to go into detail there. But my point is the city took the highest end of our comparisons, didn't put in the information about the sales, ignored the cap rates, and tried to say, here's the per square foot value. And I think that is misleading. So in the evidence, we have basically our written workups on the information I just provided verbally, and we have the income and expense mailers that you can examine if you wish to determine how we calculated our cap rates. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. But if anything, when we look at this information in whole, I think it supports our argument, and I thank the board for taking the time to review the rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pawar, any questions on the applicant's rebuttal?
No.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Just one question. So you'd indicated that 330 Donald was a sort of the closest comparable that you were using to the subject property, which was they're about 18,000 square feet. This one's about 23,000 square feet, but your sale price per square feet, $132, and you're using on a direct sales approach, $75. That seems like it's a big spread.
Yes, and the reason is, again, is that the sale price of 330 Donald
Yes.
is driven by its income, right? It's purchased as a parking lot. So the exercise in that case is not to look at the per square foot value, but rather look at the capitalization rate that is determined by that income, and then apply that to the subject property. And the cap rate here is a little lower than what we're applying, I admit. It's 5.38, but it's in the range. So that is the proper exercise, because otherwise you're not comparing apples to apples. You're saying that a site with a much higher demand and a higher income potential and a higher income, higher number of stalls, et cetera, of course, that's going to command more. So what you need to do as the exercise is determine the cap rate and then apply it to your income.
Okay, thank you. No further
Thank you.
questions.
Okay, so all of these projected net operating incomes are from actual information that you obtained, correct?
Yeah, in most cases, Mr. Chairman, it's from the actual INEs that we've, because we represent the properties. In some cases, it's based on our best information. For example, the very first one on King, we had to estimate because we only had what the city reported as the gross income. But, we're usually going to be pretty close.
Okay, if I may characterize your main argument on this fruit bottle for this property, you're saying that these comparisons that the city has used are not good for this property, correct?
Not necessarily. Some, yes. Some I don't think are good, like an assemblage sale or a sale that's only 3,000 square feet. And that's no good. But the other ones, my point is, do not be misled by the per square foot sale price. What we need to do if we're valuing it based on income is take a look at the capitalization rate. And that's how we level the site-specific characteristics of properties and determine a better value. So it's the lens through which we examine these sales, Mr. Chairman. And the lens has more, we need to look at all the information around the sales.
Okay. Yeah. I think what I was getting at is that yeah, no, I will withdraw the question.
If I didn't explain myself, I'm happy to answer anything because
no. I think my question is not valid at this point. So,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we can't hear you.
so I'm not going to pursue my question any further, so I don't think it's valid at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I need to just focus on this property. Okay, so we have gone through both presentations and the rebuttal. Anything in summation, Ms. Pawar?
No, but I would like to confirm 2025 assessment to be maintained at 2,160,000. Thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Slaughter?
Just simply, Mr. Chairman, that we can't ignore the site-specific realities of a property, its location, its potential for development, and potential for income production. Thank you.
That then concludes this item number 187 Gary Street. We'll move to the next property on the docket, which is item number 2, 499 Warsaw, also vacant commercial. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Ms. Pawar, you may begin your presentation on this property.
File number 242062, roll number 12096136000. The address of the subject property is 499 Warsaw Avenue. The owner is Richmond 6 Limited. 2025 assessed value based on the reference date of April 1st, 2023 is 1,274,000. The subject property is parceled as vacant commercial with a zoning of C2 and the land area is 18,143 square feet. On the page number 2, we don't have any recent sale. The last sale was in the March 7, 2018. And the subject property was sold at 8,735,000. On the page number 3, I have the pictures of the subject property. The subject property is at the corner of Pembina and Warsaw Avenue. And I have the more pictures on the page number 4. As per my analysis, I saw that the subject property is used as a storage for the vehicles for the urgent dealership. Its name as a More vehicle dealership. On the page number 5, this property is also evaluated on the land only with $70.22 per square feet. I have a 4 comparables with the mean of 84.68 and the median is 82.56. My best comparable on this property is comparable number 2 based on the zoning and the most recent sale out of my all 4 comparable. This comparable is the smaller than the subject property and the sale price is 84.85 and our subject property is valuated at 70.22, which is fair. On the page number 6 up to page number 11, I have the pictures of the 4 comparables. So that is the end of my presentation. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions for the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick ones. The subject property is located on the east side of Pembina Highway, south of Confusion Corner. Is that correct?
Yes,
And this area, would you agree it's characterized mostly by industrial properties and auto dealerships?
yes.
Is there any other multi-residential development in the close proximity on the east side between Confusion Corner and even 600 Pembina?
As per my awareness, I don't have really idea because I barely go to that area. But I know the subject property is located in the area where is the mostly car dealership as well.
That's all the questions. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Just one question. So the car dealership is using this property, but it's not owned by the car dealership. Are they paying, do you know if they're paying rent for this property
Both
then?
has the same owner as per I
They are the same owner as the
Yes,
car dealership? Okay, all right.
yes.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
So then the dealership itself and the lot are two separate roles?
They are the 2 separate roles, but the same owner,
Same owner.
Richmond 6 Limited.
Okay. Is that typical of dealerships that you would have the separate roles for the building and the lots?
Sorry, I could not able to understand your question.
Is that typical for dealerships to have separate roles, one for the building and one for the lot?
It's not really the case. If that is a separate parcel, then there should be a separate role. So if it is adjacent to it, sometimes it's the same role. But if it is a separate parcel, then it will be the separate role.
Okay, I understand. I have no further questions. Mr. Slaughter, you may begin your presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've talked about location. I'll start right on page 6, if I may, please. There's an aerial photograph and a photograph of the property itself. So it's a surface parking lot. It's used by the owner of the nearby auto dealership. And exactly to your point, Mr. Chairman, that you're asking, is this common? Well, no, because most auto dealerships will have enough land, right there that the assessment includes the land used for the car storage. But along Pembina, the land sites are a little tighter, and so some of the dealerships need ancillary land. So ideally, this should be one assessment because the lot or the business is requiring this land for their operations, but it's separately assessed, so we'll treat it as such. But to be clear, it is used for the inventory of the nearby dealership, and there's approximately 46 stalls on site. The surrounding area is important when we look at the value of the site. This part of Pembina Highway along the east side is mostly an industrial area, actually. There's some commercial along the front of Pembina, including some auto dealerships, but behind that, a lot of auto body shops and other industrial type properties. The likelihood of a multi-res development along this stretch, at least at April 2023, in my mind, is very low. And we need to take that into account. Again, when we're looking at value of land, if we're saying, okay, forget what the land is used for and the fact that it really should be part of the assessment for the dealership. But if we're to look at it separately, hypothetically, what could it be worth? Well, the number one question is, what could it be used for? If I'm to buy the land, am I likely to be able to develop this in some way that would command a higher value? And my answer is likely not. And therefore, we need to be cautious when we look at the comparisons of sales of land that were clearly purchased for development. So at the bottom of page 9, we've gone through an exercise of looking at various more commercial lands outside of the downtown that have sold near the reference date. The very first one is on Center Street. You'll see this at the bottom of page 9. Again, we have photographs, aerial photographs in the appendix of each of the sites. So the first property is 64,927 square feet. It was actually zoned the use code is multi-residential, but the zoning was C2. So it's in an area clearly being developed for multi-res development. It's in Bridgewater. In fact, it was purchased for development, and a 5-story mixed-use 112-unit multi-residential property was constructed. So we've got 2 factors to consider here. Number one is that it's a larger site. So I talked before about economies of scale. So we should probably be adjusting upwards slightly. But I mean, this was purchased for a completely different use. There's a density and a certainty that are factored into that sale price. Number 2 is also in the same location. And again, it was built with a 5-story mixed-use 165-unit multi-residential property. Zone CMU, developed for residential. The third is on St. Anne's, 1269 St. Anne's. It was a partially developed site with a parking lot in St. Vital, purchased for development with a commercial or possibly multi-residential property. So they haven't yet developed, but the plans are to develop that. And it sold for $28.31 a square foot, right at the reference date, but it is larger at 86,538 square feet. Number 4 is in the Seasons development. This was a commercial property that was purchased for commercial development. So that's probably a better indicator because you don't have the density with a commercial development as you do with multi-story, multi-residential. But it is far larger, so we need to account for that in the appropriate rate to apply to the subject. But that sold for $23 a square foot. The next is on Pembina, further down Pembina. And it was sold for multi-residential development, and it was sold at $28 a square foot. Again, far larger. And the last one, I think, is an interesting comparison as far as location and size. But this is in Osborne Village, and it was sold for residential development, clearly. And it sold for $77 a square foot. So here is where we look at the sale and say, physically, pretty good, better location, in a location that is conducive to multi-residential development and green lighted for residential development. So we need to factor those factors in making a downward adjustment for the subject property where you're not likely going to build a similar property in the midst of industrial properties on Pembina Highway. So a lot of adjustments to make. We need to adjust upwards for our sales that are larger in size, but otherwise I think capturing what the utility would be for the subject. And we need to adjust downwards for the properties that are clearly, multi-res development potential. And so we end up in a middle ground between that high of $77 a foot and the lowers of the high 20s, and we go to about $50 a square foot. And that's what we've applied on a direct sales comparison approach. $50 a square foot applied by 18,143 square feet would give us a value of $907,000. Now we look to an income approach value as well, because it is being used as a parking lot. And we say, well, hypothetically, if the owner didn't own this and he had to rent the stalls, what would the income potential be? And therefore would be able to determine what an appropriate income approach value would be. Well, again, we don't have actual information, but that certainly doesn't preclude us from doing a market analysis. We again refer to the city's market rate parameters, parking rate parameters that I referred to earlier. And we do have that in our evidence again. I won't ask the board to turn to it now, but I'll just cite what it says for parking lots in the suburbs where the subject is located, between $21 and $39 per stall per month net. So again, we're going in the higher end of that scale. We've applied $35 a square foot net. Times 12 times 46 stalls would give us an income potential per annum net of $19,320. And then we apply a capitalization rate. Unfortunately, I don't have any capitalization rates because these properties in the suburbs don't often trade for income production. But we approximate it based on the rate that we applied for downtown, based on the evidence we had downtown. That was 5.5%. So if we applied 5.5% cap rate to our income estimated, that determines a value of $351,273. So now as doing the valuation, I step back and say, okay, so what's the highest and best use? Clearly, it's not as an income producing parking lot. It's probably for its interim use, which is of value to the owner in some way for their operations, but really inherent in the income valuation of the property itself. So the question is, should we be applying a value here? Because if it was part of the roll number, I don't think there would be an additional value added, right? But it is a separate roll number, so we go through the exercise. And I would suggest that in the long run, this likely wouldn't continue as income production parking lot if it wasn't needed by the owner, but is not going to be a high-density multi-res development. And so we go back to the direct sales comparison approach. Not to say that there's a potential for development right now, but that would be the more appropriate approach in my mind. And so we revert to the much higher value of $907,000 a square foot. No, sorry, $907,000 total. And that, Mr. Chairman and panel, completes our presentation. Thank you.
Ms. Pawar, any questions for the applicant?
Yes, I have one question on page number 9 of the applicant's brief. So it says the city assessment department has assessed the subject property at approximately 28.12 per square foot. Where did you get that information from?
That's a mistake. I apologize.
I was searching for it.
Yeah, I
So based
apologize.
on that, because my brief says $70 $22 and you said 28.12, and based on that, I think your comparables, you find the comparable nearly $28.12 per square foot to match the your comparables for the land value.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the adjustment of economies of scale, I might be concluding that, but certainly that's an error for me to say that that's the assessment. That was a typo.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
As long as you were aware about it, that's what my question is. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Kraus, any questions?
Yeah, just the comparisons are they were all purchased with the idea of development, correct? Like it wasn't, you don't have any comparables that are in a similar industrial area that will be maintained as a similar industrial sort of situation.
No, I don't, and you're correct. And in my mind, that indicates a higher value when you look at the development potential. So, yeah.
And then I'm just looking at, and this may have been a better question for the assessor. The value of the sale from March of 2018 was 8 million. Is that correct? And was that the present owner? Or is that
If you're asking me, Mr. Cross, I'm almost 100% certain that was the combined price for their assets in the area. I think they have, yeah, they have the properties at 222 Pembina, 300 Pembina. Just to give you a sense, those assessed values are 1.7 million, 6 million, and then this parking lot. So I think I'm almost certain that's what the price was.
And do you know what the, like, when you can break it down, do you know what the assessed value or what the sale value was for the parking lot itself at that time?
No, it would have been entered as a combined sale. If it was separately registered at land titles, we would see a separate sworn value for it.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All my questions have been answered. Anything in summation, Ms.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mr.
can you hear me?
So I would like
Okay.
board to confirm 2025 assessed value to maintain.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think Ms. Schultz had something to say.
Yeah, I didn't get a question in, so I didn't hear Mr. Chair, so I do have one question for the
Oh,
applicant.
sorry. Yeah. Okay.
You
Sure,
had cut
go
out,
ahead.
sorry. So you had, you're saying that was an error that you had at the $28.12 per square foot on the city assessed value. Did you pick your comparables based on that? Because they are very similar in price per square foot. Would it have looked different if you would have had the $70.22 per square foot?
No, I was trying to find high traffic commercial locations that have sold, but unfortunately, not many of those type of properties sell unless somebody sees a green light for development. And that's the tricky part here. But no, my conclusions would have been the same. That was strictly just a typo on my part, and I apologize.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my apologies, Ms. Schultz. I have no other questions. Anything in summation, Ms. Pawar?
Yes, I would like to vote to confirm the 2025 assessed value to maintain at 1,274,000 based on the comparable data I provided. Thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The applied value or the assessed value of $70 a square foot or higher is based upon sales of properties which had a green light for high density development that the subject property would not have. I therefore ask that a $50 a square foot value be applied.
That will then conclude item number 2, 499 Warsaw.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't go through the rebuttal.
Oh, I didn't realize there was a rebuttal for this one as well.
Yes, it's short, but if I may, because I was making a lot of comments about the sales being high development potential, and I didn't talk about the evidence behind that.
It's the same file that
Okay.
was previously shared.
Same document, but not the same sales, of course.
Oh, I see.
And I don't need to spend much time on this. I'll just refer to the panel that all of the sites that are cited by the city were quickly developed. They were green light based on their location and other factors for development. And there's pictures of each of them. So I'll just leave it at that if you'd like. That's the extent of the rebuttal, just to say that these are not comparable properties in my mind.
Okay. Any questions on the rebuttal, Ms. Pawar?
No, I don't have any questions on that. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Kraus?
So you're saying that all of the comparables that the city has offered have been green lit and quick, I'm just one comparable 265 Osborne, I know has been a vacant lot forever.
That's a good point. That one I drove by yesterday because I was trying to get my information was that was purchased to be a parkade structure for the building beside, but nothing's happened. So you're right. That one's a little different. It's not a multi-res development, but it is from what I understand, a commercial development.
And it's also in a similar area. It's like almost right across the street, correct?
It's at Confusion Corner. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Schultz, any questions on the rebuttal?
No question. Thank you.
I have no questions. And did you get a summation in, Mr. Slaughter? I don't believe you did, right?
No, it would be the same summation, Mr. Chairman. That I think the value based on the sales that we've seen are inflated to what I believe the development potential would be for the site.
Okay, that will conclude item number 2, 499 Warsaw. We'll then move to item number 3, 228 King Street. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Do we have a submission from the applicant on this property?
No, Mr.
Sorry. I don't believe
there
we have a
there is no submission of evidence from the applicant side.
right. And our intent was, Mr. Chairman, we just would like to seek confirmation. I haven't received instruction from the ownership, but I believe that the assessment appears fair. But one thing I do ask is that the owner would probably like to see the evidence of the city. So if I could obtain that, please.
Okay. And we will begin the presentation, Ms. Pawar, for this property.
The file number 242534. Roll number is 13080113000. Address is 228 King Street. Owner is Winnipeg Chinatown Seniors Care Home. 2025 assessed value based on April 1st, 2023 is 794,000. The parcel is vacant commercial, zoning is C, and the land area is 14,231 square feet. And we don't have any recent sale of the subject property. On the page number 3, we can see the pictures of the subject property is at the corner of Pacific and the King Street. On the page number 4, there is a Google picture view, still the vacant lot. On the page number 5, the subject property is valuated on the land only and with the rate of 55.79 per square foot. I have the same set of comparable I presented in the brief earlier before in the morning for 187 Gary Street. And the mean is 115.88 and the median is 120.22. So if I need to choose the best comparable based on the zoning, I would say the comparable number 8 or 7 is the best. But they are the smaller lot compared to the subject property. So we can also see the price per square foot is also kind of a half of the subject property because the smaller lot has a higher sale price per square foot. So from the page number 6 up to the page number 22, I believe, are the pictures of the comparables. So that is the end of my presentation. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Slaughter?
Oh, no questions of the assessor, just if the secretary could forward the.
I have sent the briefs to you. They're on the way. They've been
Okay.
sent from my side. Just let me know as soon as you receive them.
Thanks very much. So no other questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions. Mr. Slaughter, you're going to ask for confirmation on this one, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. In our analysis of the property, it appeared that there were plans for some sort of a development, but they haven't happened. I haven't had any answers on if extraordinary factors stalled that plan. But without that evidence, I have no issue with the actual assessment. So I'd just like to confirm it. And if the owners wish to pursue it further, they may.
Okay, so noted.
Thank you.
Anything in summation, Ms. Pawar?
Oh, I would like board to confirm the 2025 assessed value to maintain at 794,000. Thank you.
Okay, that will conclude item number 3, 228 King Street. I think it's a good time to maybe take about a 10-minute break.
Sure.
So we'll reconvene at about 10:28. Okay, we are back in order. The next item on our agenda is item number 4, 914 St. James Street. Also vacant commercial land. This is an application for the amount, originally of the amount of the assessed value and for classification. Is that correct, Mr. Slaughter?
Yes, I'd like to keep the classification appeal in play for the moment, Mr. Chairman, but likely I will just ask for confirmation at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
On classification alone.
Classification, okay. Ms. Pawar, you may begin your presentation.
For sure. The file number 241381, roll number 0756913525. Address is 914 St. James Street. Owner is Oxbow Holding Limited. 2025 assessed value is based on the April 1st, 2023 is 3,213,000. The parcel is vacant commercial, zoning as C3. Land area is 80,355 square feet. On the page number 2, we can see there is no sales history of the subject property. On the page number 3, we can see the pictures of the subject property is at the corner of St. James and St. Matthews Avenue. And the page number 4, I have the pictures of the Google view, which says the subject property is a vacant commercial lot. And there is a signage for the lease for the retail development. It's still like that. And the property is valued at the land only with 39.99 per square foot. I have the 5 set of comparables with the sale price per square foot range from 29.26 to $70.60 with the mean of 43.32 and the median is 32.72. In order to choose the best comparable, it's hard for me to choose any of one comparable as a best comparable. If I'm choosing the blending of that, I would say comparable number 5 and comparable number 1 and the comparable number 3 are the best comparables based on the recent sale or either the zoning is matching to the subject property. On the page number 6 up to the page number, I think 13, I have the pictures of the comparables of the subject property. So this is the end of my presentation. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions for the assessor?
Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Ms. Parr, for the presentation. And you mentioned of the 5 comparisons, the ones that you kind of put most weight on. And just before I ask this question, just to kind of reiterate, a big theme of today's discussions is when we're looking at the value of property, the prices of lands that have sold, a big factor is what is going to be done. Again, higher density potential and a shorter timeline to that potential is going to inflate the sale price. So my question is, you would agree that, the other thing that we've been talking about is economies of scale. So my question is, comparisons 1 and 2 are both far smaller and also purchased for high density multi-residential development. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Comparison 5, though, I think that one's interesting because that was actually purchased for commercial development and it's closer in size. And you would agree that the per square foot value is much lower, therefore likely reflecting the theories that I'm trying to describe today. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So at $29 a square foot, the assessment again for the subject property is $40. So would you agree that an adjustment is warranted to the subject property's value?
I agree with you.
Do you have a recommendation then for a revised value?
So that value is generated by the mass appraisal system, but if I am comparing that subject property net rate per square foot, that's what I'm emphasizing. I could not able to choose either of one comparable is the best comparable, so I'm using the blended of them.
Okay, so to be clear, that you don't recommend a downward adjustment to the assessment?
No, because I can see the subject property is in the good location, the St. James area, and it's at the corner lot, and it's good for the development because it's nearby. It's a busy traffic area, and also there's a mall and major retail stores. So I believe $40 per square foot is the fair.
So let's continue around that then. The assumptions about the subject property. The subject property has been vacant for at least 20 years, I believe. Is that correct?
I could not able to check that because I only see the current condition is vacant and there is a signage for retail development for lease.
Yeah, that's been there for years and years, correct?
That's what I told you. I never checked the past history.
Okay, thank you. And are you aware that directly across St. James is the site that Shindeco developed for, at the time, Target, and it was going to be populated with other CRUs around the site? There was no demand for anything else at that site once the Target was completed, correct?
I don't have any knowledge about that.
Okay. That's all the questions.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Ms. Schultz, any questions for the assessor?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Your comparables. Were you not able to find any comparables in the St. James area where the subject property is?
Yes, I could not able to find the comparables nearby the subject property, so that's why I choose the area going more towards to the south side.
Why the south side?
Because I can't find the good comparable in terms of the land area. So these are the best comparable I could able to find out from our system, so that's why I choose those comparables for my subject.
Yeah, but you said I chose to go to the south side. Why the south side?
In terms of the rate, the net rate per square foot, which can justify the subject property. So the properties I choose it for the presentations are the best overall the city. So the south side of the city is the more justify the value my subject property. So that's why I choose.
So you didn't look at the north side then?
I checked it, but that's not the close proximately compared to my subject property.
Okay. I have no further questions then. Okay, Mr. Slaughter, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, we'll go right to page 6. And I'm just going to start by, again, reiterating a couple of the themes today, because they apply to each and every one of these properties, or any land valuation for that matter. Be careful when you're looking at sale prices of just a property, because if it is greenlit for development of a higher density, like multi-residential, it will command a higher price. If it's greenlit for development of commercial with a lower density, it may command a decent price, but certainly nothing close to the residential. We see that in the evidence by both parties today. So commercial development, what we're seeing is it's closer to the $20 to $30 a square foot. I mean, we have the exception with the property at Confusion Corner, but let's remember that that property was purchased for a parkade for its adjacent office, and it's directly beside the rapid transit corridor. So it's probably high demand for commuters. I mean, so you look at the factors behind, right? Number one, what's the density going to be? Number two, if the density isn't there, what else might be influencing the price of the property? Number three, if it's income producing, let's be careful to make sure that we don't then value it on the square foot, but rather its income potential with a capitalization rate. And number four is, let's think about the subject property. Let's think about its history and really try with common sense to understand, well, do we think that this is going to be a high development potential site? So the subject property is in the St. James corridor. Mr. Chairman, you asked a question of the assessor, and I would have the same answer. For whatever reason, in the period right up to the reference date, it is harder to find sales in this area. And the sales that we do find are typically are lower per square foot, because St. James is characterized by a lot of historically industrial properties that are gradually being developed for commercial. So oftentimes when we see sales in the immediate vicinity, they're going to be in the teens. And I'll talk about that in the comparisons. And I don't think that's necessarily appropriate here. But on the other hand, let's remember that this site for about 20 years has been vacant. And there's been interest by the owner. Trust me, we've been working for the owner about that long. They would love to develop this site. They would love somebody to lease this site for development, but there has not been the demand. As you get north of that St. James retail development, where the Save On and the Babies R Us, I believe it is. That's not the name, but north of that, it gets more into the industrial sort of demand, and the commercial demand is not quite as high. It's not to say that it isn't there in some cases, but not to the point where an investor is going to pay these sort of prices for that land, because they're not going to get the development or the income potential from the site. The demand has actually been surprisingly muted in this immediate vicinity. I referred to the development that Shindico did on the old stadium grounds. We're right across the street from this. And the plan was to fill that site with CRUs. There was no demand. They finished the target. They went vacant soon after. They sat with a vacant building until they occupied it with multiple tenants. They did one CRU on the site, and that's the Asian restaurant. I can't remember the name. The rest was undeveloped. And that is the similar circumstance the owners have had here. So we look to history. And we say, you know, if the demand was there, we would have seen it happen by now. Then we look to the evidence and we say, well, it's probably going to be a commercial development. Now, one of the things that's happened in 2021 is the airport vicinity restrictions on multi-residential development were slightly lifted. And this was mainly for development at Polo Park. And there's been a big push even before the accelerator fund that, you know, demand on directly on regional shopping center parking lots could be attractive. But of course, we couldn't develop residential in this area because of the vicinity to the airport. So they did pass in 2021 an allowance that could potentially allow for multi-residential development. But again, there has to be demand for that. And the problem with that allowance is it comes with restrictions. One of the restrictions is that you have to have a soundproofing level. And it's in, I have this in evidence of the amount of soundproofing the building would require. So as an investor, then you sit back and say, okay, well, there's really no demand for anybody to build a multi-residential at this site, maybe at Polo Park, but likely not here in this high traffic area. It's more of a commercial development area. And secondly, it's going to cost me X amount more to build that multi-residential. So I think that likelihood is very slim. The reason though, Mr. Chairman, is that I kept classification in play is because if it is adamant that this site should command values of multi-residential development, then we should be looking at the classification of this property as residential, because that is what the regulations dictate. If the primary use is determined to be future residential development for vacant land, classification should follow. But I'm not pursuing that because in my mind, as an appraiser, that is not the highest and best use of the site based on the reasons I just provided. It is for one day an appropriate commercial development. That is most likely to happen, but the demand still isn't there. So with that background, we turn to our list of comparisons on page 9. Now, one of the difficulties I think both of us are having, the assessor and I, is that you look at a lot of these sales, and again, number one, a lot of them are for residential development, different density. I have to consider that. Another thing is that the commercial properties are often on a smaller size, or they have a commercial potential, like being close to an office tower for parking and commuters for rapid transit that are going to influence the price. But I look at the same comparisons again, and I feel a bit better this time about these because they're closer in size to the subject property. But again, most of these are actually developed for multi-residential development. Number one, I mentioned this before, is in Bridgewater, 5-story multi-residential development. Same as number 2. Number 3 on St. Anne's is a slated for commercial development. So that's probably a better comparison. That's actually quite a good comparison, actually, at $28 a square foot. Sterling Lion was developed for commercial development. So that is a good comparison. Very good comparison there. It's a better location in my mind. Season is now outpacing St. James for commercial activity. Kenniston and Center, this is down in Bridgewater. It's a much larger site and it's purchased for future development. But I would say that we need an upward adjustment to that sale price of $15 a square foot. McPhillips was purchased for phase 2 of Polaris Place, which will be a commercial development. I think that's a very good comparison, but far larger and not as good a location. So we need to upward adjust from $16. And then lastly, Sage Creek was purchased for multi-residential and commercial development. So I think that actually is a pretty good comparison. It's a bit older and a bit larger. So from $16, I'd suggest an upward adjustment. But the average, so we're looking at better and inferior properties. The average of them all is $22 a square foot. And so I think that all things considered, and especially because if the property was to be developed, it likely would have by now. There are concerns from a demand side on this property. So I don't think it would command as high as $28, but I don't think we're far off based on my comparisons. And what I have chosen is $25 a square foot. And I think that's still quite optimistic. So $25 a square foot. There is one sale, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to point out that isn't part of the graph. And it's north on St. James. closer to Wellington. It's at 1530 St. James, and it sold in 2017 for $13.53 a square foot. And I mentioned before, there are some sales in St. James, but oftentimes they're going to be these kind of sites that are industrial zoned, or perhaps recently C3 zoned, but in a more industrial location, and then they sell for commercial development. And this was developed with commercial development. It was an auto retail, sorry, a vehicle related property. So it did sell for a commercial development. It's on St. James, but it's lower at $13.50 a square foot. And so I have another typo here near the bottom of page 10, but the price should be, based on our analysis, $25 a square foot. And when we apply that to the area, we would have a value of $2,352,000 total. And that is all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and panel.
Thank you. Ms. Pawar, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
I have the question on page number 9. It's out of your 7 comparable, I can see the comparable number 3 and 4 are the post-reference date. Do you agree with it?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, if we are strict about April 1, then yes, those are post-reference.
And also it's the same error of $28.12. So I would like to highlight, and there is no further question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kraus, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. So the city's using 80,355 square feet. You've got 78,408. If I take the 78,408 that you have and multiply it by your $25 a square foot, that equals 1,960,200, where you're saying your value is 2352000.
Thank you, Ms. Crow. So I'm just going to go
confused.
back through the math here, and I have 1.8 acres, which when I use 43,460 square feet per acre, that's how I got the 78,408. Because you'll see in evidence the city's record showed as 1.8 acres actually. And then I had $25 a square foot, I believe. And that looks like I have another
25
typo.
times that gives you 1,960,200.
Yeah, what did I do there? I apologize.
It works to $30 a square foot is what your math works out to at your 78,408 square feet.
408 times 25. Holy smokes, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
But I feel safe on the $25 a foot, so I'd like to suggest that I apologize to the panel. I did something wrong on my math. It should be 1,960,000.
Okay.
And I was pretty consistent in my error. I carried that right through to my conclusions.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Okay. And then your city, where Ms. Pawar pointed out on that one page 9, where you had $28.12 square feet.
That's an error.
So
Yeah.
that was an error as well.
Yeah. It should be $40 a square foot.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. Apologies again.
Thank you. I have no questions. And anything in summation, Ms. Pawar?
I would like board to confirm 2025 assessed value to maintain at 3,213,000. Thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Slaughter?
Just again, an apology for my carelessness on that calculation. I am of the opinion that $25 is the more appropriate per square foot value, and the area is 1.8 acres. So the calculation should be 1,920,000 or 60,000. I'll check that again, 1,960,000. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, I did have rebuttal again, but it's simply pictures to show the development that I mentioned for the city's comparisons. Maybe I'll just leave that with the panel. You can reference that if you wish.
Okay, thank you. That will conclude item 4, 914 St. James Street then. We'll then move to item number 5, file number 24-1747, This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Mr. Slaughter, I believe you are requesting confirmation on this property, correct?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, this is 08 is the roll number starting? Is that correct? 0802114200? Was that the?
Correct.
Yes, please, a confirmation. This is a property where the adjacent property, which is also owned by the same owner, uses this lot for parking. It's much the same situation that we talked about for Warsaw earlier. But in this case, the city has made an adjustment to the value of the primary property and the amount of this assessed value, which is really what we'd like to see happen. And therefore, we have no contention with this site anymore because it's already been adjusted on the primary. So just a confirmation is fine. Thank you.
So, Ms. Pawar, can you please read in this property for the record on that basis, please?
The file number 241747, roll number is 0802114200. Subject property does not have any address and it's owned by the city of Winnipeg. 2025 assessed values based on April 1st, 2023 is 324,000. And the parcel is a vacant commercial, zoning of C1. The land area is 5,001 square feet. On the page number 2, we can see there's no any sales history. Page number 3, we can see the pictures of the subject property. On the page number 4, there is a Google picture view. We can see the parking lot, and there is a 492 St. Anne's Road is a strip mall, and I believe that parking lot is used for the parking for the customer's vehicle. And page number 5, this property is valued at the land only with 64.79 per square feet. I have a 4 set of comparables with the mean of $80.83 and the median is $77.98. My best comparable for this property is comparable number 2, which is 481 St. Anne's Road, which is right across the street, and it's sold in 2019, but the zoning is same. And I believe 481 is now merged with 475, which we can see from the pictures. I believe on page number 8, there is a apartment is in construction, and the 481 comparable number 2 is merged with that. So from page number 6 up to the page number 12, I have the pictures of the comparables property. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to confirm again, the property this is near the last property, is that correct?
Which one, the subject property?
914 St. James?
940? No, actually, this is the St. Anne's Road. I saw your brief as a wrong pictures. I checked it and your brief has a wrong picture if you're referring your brief. Subject property is on the St. Anne's Road.
Oh, yes, but this is, we're seeking confirmation on this one, are we not?
If you're seeking a confirmation on that, and you're referring your brief as a wrong picture.
Okay. But again, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm getting mixed up on where we're at now. This is the roll number 08 starting again, correct?
Yes, 08.
Yeah. So then there's no need for any questions. We'd just like to seek the confirmation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions. And Mr. Slaughter, again, you are requesting confirmation.
Correct, Mr. Chairman, thanks.
I don't believe there's any need for summation on this. So we can then conclude item number 5, file number 24-1747. Next property on the docket is item number 6, file number 24-1390. There is no address for this. And this is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value and for classification as well. Ms. Pawar, you may begin your presentation.
For sure, the file number 241390, roll number is 075691372265. Subject property does not have any address. The owner is Oxbow Bow Holiday Halting Limited. 2025 assessed value is based on April 1st, 2023 is 1,047,000. Parcel is vacant commercial, zoning is C3. The land area is 52,198 square feet. On the page number 2, we can see no sales history of the subject property. And the page number 3, we can see this subject property is adjacent to the previous property presented 914 St. James Street. And this is also the vacant commercial lot. On the page number 4, we can see the pictures. The property is valued at the land only with $20.06 per square feet. I have the same set of 5 comparables with the mean of 43.32 and median is 32.72. And I would like to say the comparable number 5 is the best comparable, and it is also located in the south side of the Winnipeg, nearby the South Point Road, and it is developed as a neighborhood shopping center. From the page number 6 up to the page number, I believe 12. No, 13. I have the pictures of the comparable properties. So that is the end of my presentation. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Mr. Chairman, this is the property, Ms. Barr, I meant to ask. This is immediately adjacent to 914 St. James that we previously discussed, is correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's considered, though, I guess, rearage to that in that it's not fronting St. James Street. Is that correct?
Let me quickly check from the pictures. No.
Okay. And unlike 914 St. James, this site is not serviced. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. Would any of those factors be considered in the valuation of the subject property?
I don't really know how it is valuated because it's done by the appraisal model. I don't know the fully knowledge how it calculated, but as compared to the 914 St. James, I can see the net area per square foot is less in this property based on the, I think, perimeters, because it's not facing front on the BG Street, St. James Street, and it is I believe it is a smaller lot as well.
Yeah. So the model recognizes some factors that it should be assessed less than 914. Not to say
Yes.
that 914 is assessed correctly, of course, but there is an inherent adjustment recognizing some of those factors.
Yes, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Questions at this time? Thank you.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, if you may just explain, Ms. Pawar, you answered the question from Mr. Slaughter, whether the property was serviced or not. If you can just explain briefly what that means, not serviced.
Service mean to say that if there is any plan on this property, right now we can't see any plans. This is still a vacant commercial, and the service is also referred to as if it is on the busy street or no, and St. Matthew's Crossing Street on the St. James Street. So that's what I believe.
Okay, you may repeat that. I didn't get a lot of that. So what is different about this property to 914 St. James in terms of servicing If you can just slow down a little bit too, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, so what I believe, the service or not, which is the St. James Street, is the busiest street and attracting more customers to buy this property or developing anything compared to the St. Matthews Avenue is a crossing street. So also we don't have any right now plans for this urgent property to 914 St. James Street. So I can't really say what kind of the service it will be there. So right
But
now.
you know there isn't any.
Right
But
now.
you know there isn't any.
No,
You just know, okay, but you haven't seen the plans, but you know there's no servicing. Correct?
yep, as I know, there is no services.
Okay. I have no further questions. Mr. Slaughter, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, on page 6, we'll see the aerial map of where the subject property is located, and then you'll see a Google Maps street view of the site. So it's a completely vacant land. It's basically rearage to 914 St. James that we talked about earlier. It has access off St. Mary's with just a kind of a dirt road right now. But again, like the property at 914 St. James, this has never had any development interest. The difference from 914 St. James is twofold. Number one, it doesn't enjoy the frontage along St. James Street. And number two, it is not serviced. You'll see on page 17, Mr. Chairman, the city's records, and I confirmed this with the ownership, that it does not have sewer or water. I assume that the lines would come off of St. James, so they would have to have that extended and connected in order to bring services to this site for development. So on page 9, we go through our direct comparison approach. Same theme applies. We have to be careful about the density and the timelines of various sales, as well as site-specific factors. Same sales are used, and I'm now checking my math carefully. I'm consistently wrong on the assessed value part above the graph, but in this case, I've got my math right on the property. So the sale prices that I went through last time, so I won't go through every one again, but they indicate that this type of commercial property, in our opinion, does not command $40 a square foot. It would be around the $20 to $25 a square foot for this type of commercial development property. So I would start with the assumption that the subject property would command something in that range, but at the lower end because it doesn't enjoy the frontage that 914 St. James did. You'll recall that in my mind, the evidence supports a value of $25 a square foot for 914 St. James, and we would go on the lower end of that range to $20 a square foot for the subject property. But that, of course, is assuming that potential development could happen, which means it's assuming that the site is serviced. It is not. So what we have to do then from a site-specific valuation point is say our hypothetical value needs an adjustment for the cost of servicing to be brought in. Altus Group Cost Consulting publishes annually a benchmark of servicing costs and all costs of construction across the country. And we can find from that the Winnipeg estimated costs. And I have that on page 11. And what Altus Group is suggesting, and this seems reasonable based on my experience, that it costs about $250,000 to properly service a site per acre. So if we apply that to the subject's area, 52,198, it would be approximately $300,000 that would cost to bring the servicing into the site. So we need to deduct that from our hypothetical value, which was $20 a square foot times 52,198 square feet, equaling 1,044,000 rounded. Deducting 300,000 would bring us to a value of $744,000. That per square foot is $14.25 a square foot. I had mentioned earlier that there was a sale of serviced land on St. James north of the subject properties that sold 5 years previous to the reference date for $15.53 a square foot. So I think we're in the right sort of per square foot value place, recognizing the location and the physical characteristics, i.e. unserviced, of the subject property. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pawar, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
Yeah, just with going back to the property at 914 St. James in comparison. So that one, I believe you came forward with a valuation of $25 per square foot. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, let me go back. And now I'm not trusting myself on anything on that property in my calculation. Yes, it was $25 a square foot, and I accidentally applied the wrong square footage, but with the square footage, it would have been 1,960,000.
Right.
So
And
it's
so
25.
this one you're proposing 20 because it's not directly on St. James, rather on a cross street. I'm understanding that correctly, yes?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Kraus. And then the second adjustment, of course, is that unlike 914 St. James, we need to recognize that it's not
Yeah.
serviced.
Yeah, and you've got the calculations for bringing in the servicing and subtracting that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Just one clarification. So if you take the cost of the servicing off and you come up to the 744, you say that that gives you a square foot, per square foot, 1425. Is that correct?
I'm not going to say anything. Check my math. So let me go through that exactly.
So it's
And I'm going to walk
700.
through the long way, which I've done 3 times, but just to make sure. So I've got confirming 52,198 square feet. Confirm that too, just to be safe. So we've got 1.2 acres. We'll start with that times 43,560, 50. Well, it's approximately 52. It's 54,432 according to that math, but 52,198 square feet times the $20 is 1,044,000.
Right.
And we had estimated that the servicing cost would be about 300,000 total.
Yep.
And that would bring us to 744,000. Yes, that is correct.
And then, but divided by the 52,198, then you're looking at a 1425 per square foot.
That's correct. I believe so. Let me make sure on the math there again. 744 divided by 52,198 is $14.25 a square foot. In a way, I agree with the rationale that this land should be half of the value of 914 St. James because of the location and the lack of servicing. So I think the city was right in that. It's the starting point. Half of what? They're saying 40 and I'm saying 25.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank
you. Okay, I have no other questions to ask on this. Just give me a moment here, please. Anything in summation, Ms. Pawar?
Yeah, I would like board to maintain the 2025 assessed value at 1,047,000. Thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Slaughter?
No, I think I'm fine, Mr. Chairman. I think I've laid out the rationale. Thank you.
Okay, that will conclude item number 6, file 24-1390. Then move to the next property on the docket, which is item number 7, file number 24-1554. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. And Ms. Pawar, you may begin your presentation, please.
Thank you. File number 241554, row number 100006776050. Subject property does not have any street address. The Ordinary Seasons Retail Corporation 2025 assessed value is based on April 1st, 2023 is 6,369,000. The subject property is classified as a vacant commercial with the zoning of C4, and the land area is 225,849 square feet. On the page number 2, we can see there is no any sales history of the subject property. On the page number 3, you can see the pictures of the subject property, which is right opposite of the outlet mall. And the page number 4 has the Google picture view. On the page number 5, the subject property is valued at the land only with $28.20 per square foot. I have the 5 set of comparables I presented earlier. For this subject property, I would like to say the comparable number 5 is the best comparable based on the zoning and the recent sale. And 335 North Town Road is a neighborhood shopping center. It has been developed to the neighborhood shopping center. And in terms of the area, I would like to say comparable number 4 is also good comparable. There is like a plan to build the multifamily apartments. So the page number 6 up to page number 13, I have the pictures of the comparable properties. So that is the end of my presentation. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to confirm on page 5, Ms. Barr, you mentioned it's the same comparisons. We've gone through these before, but just to confirm, 1, 2, 3, 4 are for multi-residential high-density development. 5, though, you did say is probably your best comparison, and that was a commercial development, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess 2 differences you'd agree with the subject property are, number 1, Index 5, which is in Bridgewater at a high traffic corner, 335 Northtown, and I think at Kenniston. It's right at the corner. It has street front. Is that correct?
Sorry, I could not able to understand the last point you were saying.
It has street front visibility. It's right at the corner of Northtown and Kenniston. Like it's not located at the further back on the site like the subject property.
Yes.
It's right at the street line. Yeah.
Yeah.
And would that be a factor for a commercial development in valuation?
I don't think so. That will be the factor. But if I'm talking about the subject property, it's in the area where the outlet mall and the mostly the retail development, as well as right now it is using as a parking lot for the outlet mall area. So as per my knowledge, multifamily or the neighborhood shopping center, both can be built on the subject property. It has a potential to build on there. Right now, the subject property has a zoning of C4, but the zoning can easily change through the city.
The
So
reference date April 23, do you have any evidence that multi-residential development would be allowed on the season site?
no, I don't have any information about that.
Correct. And would you make an adjustment per our previous discussions for economies of scale between the subject at 226,000 square feet and your best comparison at 64,000 square feet?
Yeah, there could be the adjustment for the area wise, we can say yes.
Okay. That's all the questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Kraus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Mr. Slaughter, you may begin your presentation for this property.
Mr. Chairman, page 6. The subject property is, so a seasons development is now a combination of multiple assessments. At the heart is the outlet mall, which is one assessment designated by the civic address 555 Sterling Lion. And then surrounding it are sites owned and operated by Harvard Developments, set up as various titles and assessments. And the sites that are fronting along Sterling Lion have typically been developed over the last number of years with various CRUs. The subject property is behind those. The subject property kind of lies in a space between the front-facing retail developments and the outlet mall itself. And as the assessor had mentioned, and this is correct, oftentimes the subject property is partially used for overflow parking for the outlet mall. And you can see that a little bit of that on the overhead map. I can say that if this picture was taken closer to December, there'd be a lot more cars there because I know I've parked there. So and I think now we're getting into, the comparisons that we talk about for commercial development, we're getting a little closer in size and such. But to say that this has potential for multi-res development in April 23, I don't think is correct. It is very clear where the multi-residential development is allowed and is being built, and that's further west on the west end of the season site, and the rest is designated for commercial development. Now, if one was to flash forward over a year because of the federal accelerator fund, there is now talk about possibility of developing the sites that are along Sterling Lion. But number one, that is clearly post-reference. And number two, that's not really the subject property, at least in the near term. In the near term, the subject property will likely have partial development for commercial when the demand exists. Again, there's still sites to fill up in the front. It will follow the others. Here we have that discussion I had. What is the density development and what is the timeline? The timeline for this is longer than the timeline for the front-facing properties. So that is the background on the subject property. And then we apply that background to the comparisons that we show on the bottom of page 9, which we've talked about. And some of these are for multi-residential development, so I think we need caution. But when we talk about the ones that are for commercial development, like index number 4 at Sterling Lion, they're the same sort of location. Index 6 is a mixture of multi-residential and commercial, same as index 7. And so what we see is that it's likely, and I've been saying this before, with commercial potential development properties, you're closer to the high teens and mid-20s a square foot. And the conclusion is the same here. So our conclusion is that it should be no more than mid-20s. Anything more than that is implying development potential that I don't believe exists at this time. So we, I think, are on the optimistic side, Mr. Chairman, on page 10 to say $25 a square foot is appropriate value. And when we apply that to the 226,500, I am double checking my math now. We would have a value of 5,663,000. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pawar, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Kraus, any questions?
Just looking at page 6 in the overhead picture with the overflow, or what is overflow parking. To the left, is that residential?
Yeah, as you move to the left, I mentioned, that's where you start into the multi-residential area. Yeah.
Right across the street is the residential area.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and I have no further questions. Anything in summation, Ms. Pawar?
I would like to vote to confirm the 2025 assessed value to maintain at 6,369,000. Thank you.
Oh, excuse me, I do have one more question for Mr. Slaughter. The area that you have is 226,512, which is higher than what the city has. You're aware of that?
Yeah, I think it's, and this is a problem I've had with a few of these properties, Mr. Chairman. My mathematics is going from the acreage that is cited on the city's website, and I think there's a rounding. I'm using 43,560 square feet per acre, and I think a bit of rounding is throwing me off a bit.
Okay.
They're to confirm.
Anything in summation?
They're at 225,849. I'm 226,512. Yeah, I think that's just in my math from the acreage.
Okay. Anything in summation then?
Yes. So it's a good point about the residential development, which is next door. But to be clear, that has been designated pre-development, that the site past the street on the other side is all the multi-residential development, and the commercial development is on the subject property side. So there is a line. Thank you.
Okay. That then will conclude this property, item number 7, file 24-1554. And we have Now heard all the items scheduled on the docket, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter and Ms. Pawar,
Thank
Thank you very much.
for your presentation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.